In LEGO Indiana Jones, there are these things called extras that let you spice up the game quite a bit. They are pretty much like cheats, except that you can legitimately buy them using the LEGO studs you collect in the game. Some of them make the game a lot easier, whereas others make it surprisingly hard. So can you beat LEGO Indiana Jones the original adventures with every extra activated? Upon starting a new game, I was immediately thrown into the first level before I even had the chance to obtain any of the extras. But I didn't want to start this challenge off on a dud by having to play this game normally first, so luckily I was able to drop out of the level and into the hub world of Barnett College. In order to unlock all of the extras, you usually have to play through every single level in the game and find each of the red parcels hidden within them. There's one of these in every level, and once you successfully deliver it, the associated extra will become available for purchase. But thankfully these old LEGO games also came with literal cheat codes which you could use to unlock things earlier than intended. And that is exactly what I did in order to get my hands on all 24 extras at the start of the game. It took me about 10 minutes to put in all of the codes, but by the end of it, I could finally activate the extras and venture into the jungles of South America to begin our adventure. One of the extras had turned everyone in the game completely black. And this blackness persisted even inside the level, where all I could see of Indy and Satipo were their silhouettes. And it wasn't just them that was black either. The spiders were black, the boat I had built with my bare hands was black, hell, even the objects I carried around immediately turned black upon me touching them. Same with the golden idol, which was still golden until I put my filthy hands on it. This extra did have the potential to solve racism once and for all, yet the indigenous people of wherever we were still decided to treat me as an outsider. Now, just like when I did the same challenge in LEGO Star Wars, I will make an exception to my rule of having every extra activated and deactivate the silhouettes. When I asked for your opinion on this topic, you agreed with me that actually seeing the characters was a lot more interesting for a video like this, but as always, feel free to give me your thoughts in the comments. That being said, I did replay large parts of this game later on just to see whether the silhouettes did bring something interesting to the table, and even though there wasn't much, there were at least some unique aspects to it that I'm gonna share with you. For example, when I replayed the first level, the golden idol did not change colors when Indy put his hands on it. The student that was in love with Professor Indy still had her lovely eyes, and while Marion was entirely black, her medallion still looked the same. But now that I had removed the silhouettes, we got treated to the sight of some very beautiful mustaches. The extras had bigger effects than just cosmetics, however, such as the fact that all of my enemies were quote-unquote disarmed. They were still holding pistols in their hands, which in my opinion was a clear downgrade from the carrots they would have wielded if this had been LEGO Star Wars, but at least their weapons were permanently jammed so that they couldn't use them. Before long we traveled to Egypt in search of treasure, and unfortunately the mustaches did not apply to any pictures, but at least the locals found a way to show them off despite wearing turbans, and so did their monkeys. The silhouettes didn't have any effect on pictures either, and surprisingly the disarm enemies extra already broke its promise of disarming my enemies, as the sword wielding locals were still wielding them without any issues. But that was honestly pretty okay for me, because Indiana Jones and company were entirely invincible from top to bottom. Nothing in this world could harm them at all. Well, maybe with the exception of falling down somewhere. Pits of snakes also remained very painful, although not individual snakes, which I found interesting, and I could still die to many of the traps in this game, especially the spiky ones. So this invincibility extra left me pretty vulnerable nonetheless. In the meantime, Marion had been stolen and returned again, and we fought a massive snake for not wearing the agreed upon mustache, just like every other snake in the game. Then we were threatened by some German soldiers, and the binoculars joke admittedly did not quite work when the poor guy was already black from head to toe. Now you might have already noticed from the gameplay that I was sliding around like a madman the entire time. This was because of the extra ice rink, which made the entire ground behave like a sheet of ice, and this was undoubtedly the most impactful extra in the entire game. Not only were my companions and I struggling with this, but so were all of my enemies and anything else that happened to exist around here. Such as, for example, the German egghead, who was slipping all over the place as he tried to punch the anvil in my arms. He did keep his mustache on when he, well, you know. And then I had to jump around on moving trucks, which actually wasn't as bad as I'd expected. Thankfully, I dealt double the damage with my melee attacks, so I could get rid of all of these Germans a lot faster. But even after quite a goofy boss fight, the Ark was opened and I had to look on in disappointment as ghosts that were entirely lacking in the mustache department came out of it. When having the silhouettes activated, the soldiers lost their blackness upon being taken out, and the ghosts themselves actually weren't even visible. While I was making this video, I just so happened to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time ever, and I can genuinely say that the movie was much better than I'd expected. I mean, Marion alone made this well worth watching for me, and I've gained a lot more appreciation for Belloc, who would have totally deserved more screen time here in the game as well. Especially the scene in which they were drinking together could have made for a really funny moment in Lego form. But with episode 1 in the bag, I had accidentally accumulated over $2 billion in my journey so far. So I went to Shanghai and became drugged out of my mind to celebrate. The reason why I had made so much money was about half a dozen different extras that helped me become stupidly rich through barely any effort of my own. There were a handful of stud multipliers that added up to a 3,840 times increase in the amount of money I got. And on top of that, there was an extra that caused my enemies to drop money whenever I killed them, and another one that significantly increased my stud pickup range. And since I was gaining money so incredibly fast, it never took me longer than like 2 seconds to reach the true adventurer rank in any of the levels. The outro for the Shanghai level is also perhaps the best example for why I prefer disabling the silhouettes for these types of challenge runs. I landed in India where I faced my biggest obstacles yet, as the elephants had a very bad time getting out of the mud thanks to all of the sliding that was going on. I could only really get either of them out by pushing it with the other, and with both elephants stuck in separate mud pits, it seemed impossible to get either of them out again. But that was okay, since the only reason I needed them this early in the level was to transport some crate across the mud. However, when I tried to pick it up using the elephant, I discovered that I couldn't. Thanks to an extra called Fertilizer, the same button with which I could pick things up now also served the purpose of letting the animals I was riding on drop a poo. And quite frankly, I couldn't find any other way to transport this crate over to the bridge where I needed it. So I reset the level to see what I could do instead. It was quite the challenge to get an elephant out of the first mud pit without them walking straight into the second one, but once I successfully managed to do it, I decided to ride it straight into the river and under the bridge. This is a trick I saw in one of the speedruns for this game, and it allowed me to jump up onto the other side with each of my characters without having to lower the bridge. However, after working my way forward, I ran into the issue of not being able to open the gate at the top, because this massive pressure plate needed an elephant to stand on it. I tried making do with only my characters and also 2 giant spiders that I had lured up there, but the spiders didn't seem to weigh anything at all, and my company was not nearly heavy enough to open the gate. There is a pretty interesting speedrun trick with which you can enter the palace despite the gate remaining closed, but I tried to do this myself and just couldn't get it to work. So I decided to cave in and disable the poo extra to continue, except in the exact moment at which I'd resigned myself to this fate, I kept hammering the poo button out of frustration, causing the elephant to suddenly pick up the crate after all. Therefore, I was able to carry it over to the other side where I used it to access the bridge. But in order to actually solve the pressure plate problem, I also had to get one of the elephants out of the mud, and to be entirely honest, I had no idea how to do that. I spent a full hour and a half messing around with these elephants with no luck at all, so eventually I decided that the only way I could continue was by deactivating the ice rink just long enough to get the elephants out of the mud. Weirdly enough, there were 1 or 2 instances in which the elephants randomly managed to escape the mud pits on their own, but I couldn't find any way to influence that myself. I also discovered that even if I had gotten them out of the mud, I still would have had to deactivate the extra because otherwise they would have been unable to make it up the slope. But with that, I could now finally open the gate to make it into the palace. Unfortunately, the monkey head didn't wear a mustache, and while this revolting scene would have been the perfect instance for the silhouettes to do its work, this tasty meal of course remained entirely visible. My mustache-wearing girlfriend was kidnapped by an Indian dude with the same mustache, but I quickly rescued her by blowing their evil leader to pieces. Around this time I reached the $3 billion mark, and I have absolutely no idea why Indy was still doing these expeditions at this point, because he certainly didn't need the money anymore. I managed to ride along on a really slippery minecart, which I felt pretty good about, and I always found it very entertaining whenever NPCs that were scripted to walk along a specific path instead just ended up sliding all over the place. However, this really came back to bite me in the ass when one of the slaves I rescued should have triggered a switch for me, but instead just slid away through the wall and became soft locked. I played through this scene a few more times in the hopes that something would change, but it didn't. One time I wanted to experiment with Willy's super scream ability, which was now strong enough to stun and damage multiple enemies at once. But when I used it on the slave, I ended up outright killing the poor guy instead of merely stunning him. Later on, when I replayed this level in free play, I also learned that if the slave goes to pull the switch and clips through the barricade, it actually breaks the switch entirely, so that not even I could pull it anymore. Therefore, I had no choice but to disable the ice rink for a few moments, just like I had done with the elephants, to let the kid hit the switch that allowed me to keep going. But this was not the last obstacle in this level, since even though the next slave did a better job on his switch, during the final battle against the drugged up Maharaja, he also fell victim to the slippery floor and became soft locked. No matter what I tried, I couldn't shake him loose from there, and despite the fact that the Maharaja was unable to heal the big guy, I couldn't deal more damage to him than what the script allowed. So I tried restarting the level and once again played through everything leading up to the final battle in the hopes that I could reach the Maharaja before he became soft locked. This time I positioned short round on the second platform and hit the Maharaja with a crossbow to make him move to the next phase. I was feeling really good about this strategy, but my punches seemingly didn't impact him at all, so he got stuck just like before. Therefore, I unfortunately had to save the game from itself again by disabling the ice rink. And as if 2 strikes in one level weren't enough, he got stuck in his final phase as well, which means there were 3 separate instances in this level alone where the ice rink managed to completely screw us over. Thankfully, that was the end of this level, and escaping the mines was very easy for a change. At the end of it, I reached the monumental achievement of 4 billion studs, which is also the maximum amount of money you can have in this game. For reference, purchasing every single character and all of the extras in the game would only cost around 20 million studs, which is only 0.5% of the amount of money I now had. In the final level of episode 2, my NPC friends really struggled with jumping across these rocks, and as such I often had to go back to get them. This was actually a problem throughout the entire playthrough. They seemingly just weren't programmed to deal with so much slipperiness. The battle on the bridge was mostly normal, although it felt kind of buggy to me. The boss guy seemed to be way jumpier than usual, and I really struggled to connect my hits with him as he was invincible for most of the fight. It's kind of hard to describe it, but I was even beginning to fear that this battle might be so bugged that I wouldn't be able to complete it at all. Willy's super scream was very convenient to deal with all of the minions here, but if anything, it probably just made the fight even buggier. After a few minutes, I did slowly start making sense of the situation, and before long I sent the bad guy packing to reach the end of episode 2. In the final cutscene there was one woman, the mother of one of the slaves, who must have left her mustache at home, but other than her everyone lived happily ever after until Indy's dad got kidnapped and we met yet another beautiful woman with a big bushy mustache. Episode 3 started off pretty normal as my enemies kept sliding down into the water instead of chasing me, but weird things started to happen as soon as I faced off against some evil Indian looking guy. I tried to pursue him in a canoe, but not only was it incredibly slow compared to his motorboat, it was also too weak to deal any damage to him. So I did things the normal way. However, when he went over to the next phase and took refuge on a small island, I barely noticed him sliding off the platform straight into the water. This was a surprisingly big issue for me since he seemingly hadn't been programmed to get out of it again, and I couldn't deal damage to him while he was swimming. Therefore, I carefully tried to lead him back to the first platform, which as you might have already guessed was a big mistake. When I took away enough of his health to trigger trigger the next phase of the fight, a sequence triggered in which he'd usually jump back into his boat. But his boat was nowhere near him, so we were all just standing there for a bit until his HP regenerated and the fight went on. I brought him into the final phase, and this is where things broke down completely. Because not only was I now hearing the sounds of his boat being on fire, but we were also permanently soft locked. I couldn't even pause the game anymore. The only option I had was closing the game by force and replaying the entire level. This time he did not slip off the island, but the cutscene afterwards still didn't play correctly as he failed to get into the boat, and we once again got soft locked just like before. The third time around he accidentally slipped into the water again, but thankfully I had been smart enough to fight him on the left side of the island so that he was still close enough to the boat to jump into it. So I could now finally do the last phase of the fight and finish the level. As a side note, I discovered that the trailer that plays when you stay in the main menu long enough has green snakes instead of the red ones you see in the game. Sadly, none of the paintings in the German castle were affected by my extras, and on top of that, the motorcycles controlled really badly with how slippery the ground was. It was so hard to build up any speed at all that driving into the mud pits always forced me to get off the bikes and wait until they respawned. Jumping across a chasm on these wooden ramps was also hilariously tricky at times, and the sliding was actually so bad that I wasn't able to bring one of the bikes across this bridge in order to trigger some buttons, but somehow Henry managed to do it for me. There was something really weird going on with the mustaches in the intro cutscene for Trouble in the Sky. One guy was wearing two sets of the same disguise, somebody else was wearing two different beards on top of one another, and there was a mustache just floating above Indy's hat. And on the silhouette side, this woman's hair wasn't even black. But there was something even worse going on in this level that really didn't sit well with me. Because I once again had to drive around in a vehicle, and this time around I genuinely could not get this damn car onto the bridge. I tried to leave it to Henry in the hopes that he'd be able to pull it off just like in the last level, but unfortunately he didn't have any success either. At this point I took another small peek into the LEGO Indiana Jones speedrun, and I discovered that the world record holder was able to destroy this barrier without the car by turning off the video setting for vertical sync. Now I didn't even try to duplicate this exact glitch he was doing, but I decided to try getting the car onto the bridge by disabling VSync as well. And lo and behold, after a few tries, it worked. I don't know how it worked, but it worked. So luckily, I could continue without having to deactivate any extras this time. This did not work with the elephants or the Maharaja, by the way, or at least I couldn't get it to work. I was only barely able to destroy a roadblock using the bulldozer, but what scared me the most in this level was the idea that the tank might not actually make it up to a rock barrier that led to the next section, so I was very relieved when the cutscene triggered anyways. The Temple of the Grail, which was the final level in story mode, was surprisingly easy with a single exception. My NPC buddy simply could not twist this switch around to assemble the bridge with me. He just couldn't do it because the ground was uneven and he kept sliding out of place, which supposedly gave him the impression that he needed to stop and reposition himself, even though he could have just kept twisting the damn thing like I did. I waited multiple minutes for him to do it, and even switched characters once or twice to see whether that would make a difference, but in the end I decided to connect a second controller in order to do it myself. The invincibility extra had disappointed me many times throughout this playthrough, but never as much as when I deliberately chose one of the false grails and still ended up dying. Also, the guy who lost his head earlier at least kept his mustache on, but the horses not wearing any was a truly wasted opportunity in my opinion. I am saddened to confirm that the LEGO characters in the Traveler's Tales cutscene at the end of the credits did not wear any mustaches either, and also refused to turn black. Now that I had officially finished the last level of the story, I still had to do some work to unlock the 3 bonus levels. So I went back and played through every single level at least one more time to collect collect any mini-kits I still had left. But before I did that, I went ahead and purchased every character I had unlocked so far, which, as we've already established, was hardly even worth the ink on my bank statement. Of course, I still faced the same issues during free play as I had during the story mode. My companions kept getting stuck or lost, and there were a few buggy moments that even forced me to restart some of the levels. At one point I accidentally pushed some bad guy through a wall where he remained for the rest of his life. The fight against the boxer also somehow became soft-locked as the trucks bringing the soldiers refused to show up, but thankfully I didn't have to actually finish any of the levels after collecting the minikits, as I still kept them even when I dropped out of the level prematurely. In that same level there was a minikit that was surprisingly difficult to get, as I had to steer a car onto a pressure plate, but thanks to all of the slipperiness it instead rolled downhill from where I couldn't get it back up again. Another tough minikit was in the second level where I had to use a snow speeder to drive through a number of guiding barriers, but as soon as I had built it, it would slide off into the snow and refuse to come out again. It was very difficult to push it back onto solid ground, but somehow I managed to do it and drove through all of the barriers to get the minikit. And there was a single one that was literally impossible for me to get for exactly the same reason. And this was in episode 3 where I needed to use a tractor to drive over some fields, but the tractor was so slow that it had no chance at fighting the ice whatsoever, while also being heavy enough that I couldn't push it at all. The only way I could get this done was by disabling the ice rink once again. As I went about gathering the remaining collectibles, I also used this opportunity to enjoy the secret characters extra, which gave me a few bonus characters to play as that aren't normally playable even in free play. Unfortunately, there were only 6 of those in total, which was a bit disappointing to me, and the only noteworthy one was Santa Claus, who weirdly enough didn't even have a character icon when I played as him. I also collected the 5 hidden Star Wars Easter eggs, and once again I was confused by how inconsistent this game was with its extras. Because R2-D2 and C-3PO did wear mustaches, but none of the other Star Wars characters did, even though they do wear them in their own game. But eventually I had gathered all of the collectibles that this game has to offer and made my way over to the college museum, where I finally unlocked the last 3 levels. First up was the Young Indie level, and this was very short and very easy. Unfortunately, neither the giraffes nor the lion wore mustaches, which at this point wasn't unexpected, but still disappointing to me. Next up was the Ancient City, where I had to collect 1 million studs as quickly as possible. The invincibility was really handy in this level, as I could simply blow everything to pieces, but as was to be expected, all of the stud related extras were automatically deactivated by the game. By far the hardest part of this level was clearing the racetrack fast enough. With the slipperiness, it was really tough to get enough speed to drive through all 5 checkpoints before they reset, and since I didn't even make it halfway through after minutes of trying, I asked my girlfriend to join me in the hopes that that would make things easier. But even as we played together, we still couldn't make it further than the 3rd checkpoint. For someone with more skill, I think it might be possible to make it through this racetrack on slippery ground, but since neither of us was that good, I had no choice but to deactivate the ice rink extra one last time. Which finally brings us to the warehouse, about which there's literally nothing to be said because it's the warehouse. But with that out of the way as well, we have officially failed to beat LEGO Indiana Jones with all extras activated, because I had to deactivate the ice rink in like 4 different levels. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and a special thank you to my first ever patron Izzy for helping me keep this channel alive. You can join for as little as $1.50, which genuinely supports me more than you could ever know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.